So you're welcome to this week 6, and we're going to learn about DOM manipulation. So my name still remains Samadi Chile. So what do we hope to learn for our first day of the class, which is on Saturday? So let's see that we are going to learn what is DOM, how to select HTML elements from the DOM navigation, getting and changing HTML text, adding and changing attributes, value, adding CSS, create, replacing and removing elements. Then we're also going to learn about adding event listeners. Then we'll now shift our attention a little to learn about classes, and that will help us to understand how to use the date object. And then next we'll now learn how to use set timeout and set interval. I'm going to see how we can use these two built-in methods to do amazing things. Then lastly, we're going to learn how to use promises. So let's begin. What is DOM? Now, the HTML DOM is a standard object model and programming interface for HTML. It defines the HTML element as objects, the properties of all HTML elements, the method to access all HTML elements, the event for all HTML elements. So in the DOM, all HTML elements are defined as objects. So this point is very, very important. So what is DOM? DOM stands for Document Object Model. So that's why this statement is very, very important. So in the DOM, all HTML elements are defined as objects. An object can have properties and methods. So a property is a value that you can get or set, like changing the content of an HTML element. Then a method is an action you can do, like add or delete a HTML element. So the document object represents your web page. So if you want to access any element in an HTML page, you always start with accessing the document object. So in summary, DOM stands for the document object module. So if you have, like, let's say an index page and an about page, there is a DOM for the index page and for the about page. And to access any tag or any element you have in the index page, for example, you need to pass through the document object that is given to you out of the box. So with this in mind, let's move to the next point. So to help us visualize what the DOM is, so you notice from the previous slide, it says to access anything in the HTML page, you must pass through the document. So inside the document, you can have access to the HTML element. And you know, from if we minimize a little, so if you look at this boilerplate here, you see that the HTML tag holds the entire page. Then inside the HTML tag, you have two basic tags, which is the head tag and the body tag. Then inside the head tag, you also have some other tag, and inside the body tag, you can have as many tags as you want. So that is what this that's what this box diagram here of the DOM is trying to illustrate. So inside the root element, which is HTML, you have two main elements, which is the head tag and the body tag. Sorry. Then inside the head tag, you have access to one important tag, which is the title tag, and the title tag can hold the text. Then inside the body tag, you can have an anchor tag, or you can have the heading 1 tag. Then inside the anchor tag, it has an attribute of href, which helps us to direct to which does the directing either to an internal page or an external page. Then we also have the heading 1 tag, which holds a text. So just remember that the DOM is an object of what you have, is an object model of what you have on a particular page. So it is called, now this document from the explanation so far, so based on this diagram, shows that to access anything inside a particular DOM for a page, you need to pass through the document. Very, very important, and we'll see how important it is when we move to the coding aspect. So the next thing that I want to learn in this video is how to select HTML elements, and there are 3 important ways you can do that. There are so many other ways, but these are the 3 I will teach you, which is get element by ID, the query selector, and the query selector or. And by example, you are going to see the difference between these 3 and the advantage of one, if any. So let's move to our page. So inside our body tag, we need to do some basic markup so that we can be able to play around with that, with selecting elements from the DOM. So I need to have a heading 1 tag. So I'll put here heading 1. Then I also need to have, let's say, a paragraph tag, lorem 15 Alt Z to break. Then let's have a UL.list. So inside this, I want to have an li. This one will get element by ID. So shift alt, arrow down twice. So this one will be query selector. This one will be query selector or. So if we save this, we'll have this outputted, or this output on the DOM, so we can select now. So to start with, we'll use get element by ID. So I need to give this heading 1 an ID. So ID h1. So to do that, I'll go to my index.js page, which I've already linked down here, and including the CSS. So just take note of that. So I'm going to save this on a variable. So I'll select h1 be equal to document. Remember, so if we don't pass to the document, we cannot access anything on the DOM of a particular page. So document dot get element by ID. Now we'll just put age 1. So that is how simple it is. So let's do our console.log age 1 to see if we get that particular element. So I'll right click on the browser, choose inspect, then I will press this 3 dot to choose how I want my panel to display. So I want it to display on the bottom, so that will have some room here. Then I drag down, so we have this, and you notice that if I hover over the output here, I'm getting the H1. So it shows that we've actually targeted this. So the next one is the query selector. So I'm going to use so I'll just put let p1 equal to document. Remember, it must pass to the document dot query selector. Then I'll put p. Now I just want to explain something between, or as a difference between the get element by ID and the query selector and the query selector. Now in this get element by ID, you know that in our CSS, external CSS or internal CSS, when we are selecting to reference an ID, we use hash like this. Sorry, excuse me. But in this get element by IDs, it only accepts an ID. So if you put a class there, it's not going to work properly, because it will assume you added a class value there. I mean, it will assume you added an ID value, so it will go ahead looking for an ID instead of a class. So, but it doesn't need it to put the reference because it only accepts IDs. But when it comes to our query selector and our query selector, or they makes us feel as if we are selecting using our external CSS or internal CSS. So the way we reference an ID and a class still holds for query selector and query selector. But in this instance, I want to select by tag name. So excuse me. So that is why I'm not putting any reference as to whether it's a class or an ID. But we'll see how we use that in a moment. So I'm going to put here console.log p1. So if I do that, you notice I have my paragraph 1. So now let's say I want to get by class name. So I'm going to come here, I'm going to put let ul be equal to document dot query selector. Then remember that our UL has a class name of list, so I'll put lists. If I switch tab now, you notice it's lists plural. So if I do that and say console.log ul, you notice I will get my list. So I have to refresh this a little too, so that it's showing the right format. Yes, and you see we have this. So this is nice. Now, but what about if I want to select all this list inside all this list tag inside the UL tag? How do I do that? Now that is the difference between the query selector and the query selector all. Now the query selector, even though there are more than one match based on what you put inside this parenthesis, is going to once you find the first one, it stops there, because that is how it is programmed. But for the query selector, or you can need to find as many matches as there exist in the HTML page. So let's demo that. So I'm going to put another one. Let all li be equal to document.querySelector, or then I'm going to put dot list space li. Now why am I doing this? So that in case I have any other list, it's not going to select them and activate the functionality that I activated in this instance. So just a way to ensure that it is only the list or the li that exists in this class of list that will be saved inside this variable. So thank you. So let's console.log our all li. So if I do that, you notice I have a node list. Now a node list looks like an array, but it is not an array, and within a short time you're going to learn what a node is. So a node list looks like an array, but it's not an array. But the way the node list is, by the time we want to learn how to get a text and apply CSS, this list tag that you are seeing here, they are not useful to us. So they are only useful to us when we can convert them to this format. So we are going to use one of the higher array method that can loop through a node list, which is only the for each, to make it appear in this useful format. So I call this format useful format because with this we have arrived at the promised land, or we have targeted the tag and can do our manipulation using JavaScript. So if it does not appear in this format, then you know that you have selected the element, but it's not in the useful format where you can do great things with it. So to do that, I'm going to say all li. Remember, you are going to use for each dot for each. So this is just the syntax was for each. So I put li, then my arrow function console.log li. Now if I remove this, you notice what will show now will be in a useful format. So you see I have all the li's. So because it is appearing the same way the get element by ID and the query selector appeared, so we can do amazing things with this our selection. So this is just a quick example of how we can select any tag at all or any element at all in the HTML using any of these. Now, just to also mention, if you don't want to use this get element by ID, you can also use the query selector to get an ID by referencing it with a hash. So for instance, I can come here and put, so let me add another element. So I put here p hash p2 solarium. 20. So now to select this paragraph 2, what I need to do is to come down here. I'll select P2 be equal to document dot query selector. Remember, the query selector makes us feel as if we are selecting in our normal index or in our CSS file. So I'm going to reference, because it's the P2 which has an ID attribute, so excuse me, our reference which is hash then P2. So if you don't want to use the query selector, you can. If you don't want to use the get element by ID, you can use the query selector and the query selector all, and your result will still remain the same. So consider log P2. So if I do that, you notice I still get my P2 using an ID. So I didn't use get element by ID now, but I use the query selector. So that is it for the first part of this video. In the next video, we are going to learn about DOM navigation, what it is and how we can use it.